My mother slides a stack of papers across the kitchen table, her smile warm and practiced. Just some estate planning documents, honey. Standard stuff after your grandmother passed. Sign here, here, and here. I'm 23, grieving, and I trust her completely. So I sign. 3 months later, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office watching her face drain of color as he reads the documents I actually signed. Not the inheritance transfer she thought she'd tricked me into. Something else entirely. Something that's about to cost her everything she spent my whole life manipulating me for. Want to know how trusting your mother's lies became the biggest mistake she ever made? Stay with me. Because what started as her stealing my inheritance ended with her losing far more than money. My name is Claire, and for most of my life, I believed my mother was a saint. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 2, or so she told me. She worked 2 jobs, or so she claimed. She sacrificed everything for me, or so I was conditioned to believe. The narrative was airtight, polished, repeated so often it became truth in my mind. My grandmother, my father's mother, never bought it. Your mother is a liar, Claire, she'd tell me during our weekly Sunday dinners at her sprawling Victorian home in Connecticut. One day, you'll see it. I just pray it's not too late when you do. I defend my mother with the fierce loyalty of someone who'd been programmed since birth. Grandma, that's not fair. She's done everything for me. Grandma would just shake her head, her arthritic fingers gripping her teacup. She's done everything to you, sweetheart. There's a difference. I didn't understand then. Couldn't understand. My mother had built a fortress of martyrdom around herself, and I was trapped inside it, convinced the walls were protection rather than prison. My grandmother was 87 when she died. Pneumonia that turned into complications the doctors couldn't reverse fast enough. I held her hand in the hospital while machines beeped their mechanical dirge. "Promise me something," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hiss of oxygen. "Don't let your mother touch my estate until you've had it reviewed by someone who isn't her lawyer. Promise me, Claire." "I promise," I said, not understanding why she was asking, not understanding anything yet. She died that night. My mother's grief was immediate and performative, wailing in the hospital corridor, collapsing dramatically against the wall. The nurses looked uncomfortable. I felt guilty for noticing how staged it seemed. The funeral was small. My grandmother had outlived most of her friends. My mother wore black Chanel and oversized sunglasses, dabbing at dry eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. She accepted condolences with practiced grace, playing the devastated daughter-in-law despite the fact that she and Grandma had barely spoken in years. I wore a simple navy dress and stood beside the casket, remembering Sunday dinners and the way Grandma would slip me 20s when my mother wasn't looking. "For something that makes you happy," she'd whisper. "Not practical, just happy." 3 days after the funeral, my mother called me. "Claire, honey, we need to discuss your grandmother's estate." Her voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted something. Sweet, but with steel underneath. "Can you come by the house? I've been going through her paperwork, and there are some things you need to sign." I should have remembered my promise, should have heard Grandma's warning echoing in my mind. But grief makes you soft, and I'd spent 23 years being conditioned to comply. I drove to my mother's house that evening. She'd redecorated since my last visit. New furniture, expensive art on the walls. I remember thinking it seemed excessive for someone who claimed to be living paycheck to paycheck. She had wine poured and documents spread across the kitchen table when I arrived. "Your grandmother's estate is complicated," she began, settling into the chair across from me. You know how she was. Secretive about money. Didn't trust banks. She left specific instructions about how things should be divided. I nodded, accepting the wine glass she slid toward me. The house goes into a trust, she continued, tapping a thick document. But the liquid assets, the investments, the savings, those need to be consolidated. These papers authorize me to act as a state executor and distribute everything according to her wishes. Shouldn't her lawyer handle that? I asked. Her lawyer retired last year, honey. Didn't she tell you? She'd been using Thomas Brooks. Remember him? Old family friend. He's helping us navigate everything. But we need your signature on several documents since you're the primary beneficiary. Primary beneficiary. The words should have sounded good. Instead, they felt wrong somehow, though I couldn't articulate why. What exactly am I signing? I picked up the first document. Legal language swam across the page, whereas and hereto, and party of the first part. My grandmother had paid for my college education, but she hadn't taught me to read legal documents. Standard estate paperwork. My mother's voice held a note of impatience. Authorization for me to access accounts, transfer funds, execute the will. You trust me, don't you? The question landed like a hook. Of course I trusted her. She was my mother. The woman who'd raised me alone, who'd sacrificed everything, who'd protected me from a father who'd abandoned us. Except my grandmother's voice whispered in my memory. Don't let your mother touch my estate until you've had it reviewed by someone who isn't her lawyer. I should probably read through these first, I said slowly. My mother's smile tightened. Claire, honey, these are time-sensitive. The estate needs to be settled within 30 days. Or there are tax implications, penalties, legal fees that would eat into your inheritance. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. I know this is overwhelming. I know you're grieving. But I'm trying to protect what Grandma left for you. For us. We're family. We're all we have. The familiar guilt rose in my chest. My mother was trying to help, and here I was being difficult, suspicious, ungrateful, just like she'd always accused me of being whenever I questioned anything. I reached for the pen. Sign here, here, and here, she said, flipping through pages with practiced efficiency. And initial here. Perfect. My hand moved automatically. Muscle memory from a lifetime of doing what my mother told me. My signature appeared on page after page, binding me to agreements I didn't understand. There, my mother said, when the last page was signed, gathering the documents with barely suppressed satisfaction. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now we can move forward. Get everything settled. Make sure you get what Grandma wanted you to have. I drove home that night with a feeling like stones in my stomach. Something was wrong. I'd broken my promise to Grandma. I'd signed documents I hadn't read. I'd let my mother manipulate me one more time. But it was just paperwork, right? My mother wouldn't actually steal from me. That would be insane, illegal, impossible. Except my grandmother's warning kept playing in my mind like a broken record. Don't let your mother touch my estate. Your mother is a liar. One day you'll see it. I pulled over at a gas station and sat in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows through my windshield. In the distance, I could hear the highway's endless white noise. My phone sat in my lap, my mother's satisfied voice still echoing in my ears. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months, Melissa Chen. We'd been college roommates, and she'd gone on to law school while I'd pursued graphic design. She'd told me once, during a late-night study session, "If you ever need legal advice, call me. No charge. That's what friends are for." My finger hovered over her name. This was crazy, paranoid, ungrateful. My mother would be furious if she found out I was questioning her, doubting her, investigating her. But Grandma had made me promise. I hit call. Melissa answered on the third ring. "Claire, is everything okay? I need your help." My voice came out smaller than I intended. I think I just made a terrible mistake. We met the next morning at a coffee shop near her law office. I brought the copies of the documents my mother had made me sign. She'd given me a set for my records, another detail that should have seemed suspicious, but hadn't at the time. Melissa spread the papers across a corner booth table, her expression growing darker with each page she reviewed. "Claire." She looked up, her lawyer mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Do you understand what you signed?" "Estate documents," I said. "Authorization from my mother to execute my grandmother's will." "No." Melissa's finger traced a paragraph on page 3. "You signed a quitclaim deed transferring your inheritance rights directly to your mother. Complete and irrevocable transfer. As of your signature date, you have no legal claim to any part of your grandmother's estate." The coffee shop sounds, grinding beans, steaming milk, muted conversations, faded into white noise. I couldn't breathe. "That's not." She said these were just administrative papers. She said, she lied. Melissa's voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother tricked you into signing away your entire inheritance. Based on the language here, she receives everything. The house, the investments, the savings. All of it." My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table to stop them. "How much?" "How much was your grandmother worth?" Melissa asked. "I don't know. She never talked about money. But the house in Connecticut alone must be worth easily $2 million, Melissa finished. "And based on these investment account references, I'd estimate the total estate at somewhere between $4 and $6 million. $6 million. My grandmother had been worth $6 million, and my mother had just stolen all of it." "She can't do this," I said, hearing the desperation in my voice. "It's fraud. It's illegal. We can sue, right? We can—" "Claire." Melissa reached across the table. "You signed voluntarily. No one held a gun to your head. These documents, as manipulative as the circumstances were, are legal. Your signature is valid, unless we can prove coercion or that you weren't mentally competent when you signed. I was grieving," I said. "Doesn't that count?" "Not legally. I'm sorry." The betrayal hit me in waves. My mother, the woman who'd raised me, who I'd defended against my grandmother's warnings, who I'd trusted completely, had stolen my inheritance, had planned it, had orchestrated the whole thing with cold, calculated precision. "There has to be something," I said. "Some way to fight this." Melissa gathered the papers slowly. "Let me make some calls. Research precedents. But Claire, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that legally your mother just pulled off a perfect theft." I walked out of that coffee shop into bright October sunlight that felt too cheerful for the world collapsing around me. My phone buzzed. "Mom, how are you doing, sweetheart? I know this week has been hard. Want to come over for dinner?" The casual cruelty of it, pretending to care while she'd just stolen millions from me, made something inside me crack. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove home and tore my apartment apart looking for anything Grandma had given me over the years. Letters, cards, anything that might hold a clue. In a box in my closet, I found birthday cards going back to childhood. Each one had a handwritten note. Nothing remarkable until I started reading them chronologically. Age 8. Don't let anyone make you small, Claire. You're bigger than their lies. Age 13. Remember who you are when people try to tell you who you should be. Age 18. Your inheritance isn't money, sweetheart. It's truth. Guard it carefully. Age 21. When the time comes, and it will, trust your instincts over anyone's words, even hers, especially hers. My grandmother had been warning me for years, preparing me. She'd known exactly what my mother would try to do. I grabbed my laptop and started searching. Property records, investment accounts, court documents, everything I could find about my grandmother's estate. What I discovered made my blood run cold. My grandmother had filed her will 6 months before she died. The public records showed she'd left everything to me, Claire Elizabeth Morrison. Not my mother. Me, explicitly, specifically, solely to me. Which meant the documents my mother had me sign weren't estate paperwork at all. They were an attempt to override my grandmother's explicitly stated wishes. I called Melissa. "I found something," I said, my voice shaking with anger now instead of grief. "My grandmother's will. It's public record. She left everything to me." My mother knew that. The documents she had me sign were designed to circumvent what Grandma actually wanted. Silence on the other end. Then, "Send me everything you found. Now." I emailed screenshots, links, every piece of evidence I'd collected. My phone rang 30 seconds later. "Claire, this changes things." Melissa's voice was sharp, focused. "If your grandmother's will explicitly names you as sole beneficiary, your mother's actions constitute willful interference with inheritance rights. That's not just unethical. In Connecticut, it's criminal. What do I do? First, don't confront her. Don't let her know you know. Second, give me 48 hours to build a case. Third, be prepared for this to get ugly." It was already ugly. It had been ugly my whole life. I'd just been too programmed to see it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed scrolling through old photos on my phone, childhood pictures of my mother and me, holidays, birthdays, ordinary moments that looked happy, but now felt like evidence of an elaborate performance. In every photo, my mother was smiling, but looking at them now, I could see what I'd missed before. Her smile never reached her eyes. There was always something calculated behind it, something cold. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m., a text from my mother. "Mom. Can't sleep either. Keep thinking about Mom. She would want us to take care of each other now. We're all we have." The manipulation was so transparent now that I'd seen behind the curtain. "We're all we have," her favorite line, deployed whenever I showed signs of independence or questioned her authority. I typed and deleted 5 responses before settling on, "Yeah." The next 48 hours felt like drowning in slow motion. I went to work, smiled at my boss, pretended nothing was happening while Melissa assembled evidence behind the scenes. On the second night, she called. "I found something," she said. "Your mother's lawyer, Thomas Brooks, he's not just a family friend. He's her boyfriend, has been for 3 years. And 3 months before your grandmother died, they purchased a condo in Florida together for $800,000. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "She was planning this," I said. "The whole time Grandma was dying, my mother was planning how to steal my inheritance to fund her retirement with her secret boyfriend." "It gets worse," Melissa said. "I pulled property records. The house your mother lives in, the one she claims to be barely affording. Your grandmother's been paying the mortgage for the last 5 years, property taxes, everything. Your mother hasn't paid for her own housing since 2018. Why would Grandma do that? My guess? She was trying to help her grandson's mother, despite their differences. She probably thought, if she supported your mother financially, your mother would leave you alone. But my mother had taken the help, and still wanted more. Had always wanted more. Would always want more. "What now?" I asked. "Now we go nuclear," Melissa said. "I've drafted a complaint for the Connecticut Attorney General's office outlining fraud, elder exploitation, yes, even though your grandmother is deceased, and inheritance interference. I've also prepared a civil suit for wrongful interference with expected inheritance. And Claire?" "Yeah?" "Your mother is about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating you." The Connecticut Attorney General's office moved faster than I expected. Within a week, an investigator named Robert Chen contacted me. "Ms. Morrison, I've reviewed the complaint filed on your behalf." His voice on the phone was professionally neutral. "I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with your mother and the circumstances around signing these documents." We met at a small municipal building in Hartford. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while I walked him through everything. My mother's manipulation, the funeral, the papers she'd had me sign, the discovery of my grandmother's actual will. "Did she explicitly tell you these documents would transfer your inheritance to her?" he asked, taking notes. "No. She said they were administrative paperwork for settling the estate. She said I was the primary beneficiary, and these were standard procedures." "And you believed her because?" "Because she's my mother." The words tasted bitter. Because I'd spent my entire life being trained to trust her, to believe her story about being a struggling single parent who'd sacrificed everything. I didn't know she'd been living rent-free in a house my grandmother paid for. I didn't know about the boyfriend. I didn't know any of it. Chen nodded slowly. "Ms. Morrison, what you've described is a pattern of behavior called financial exploitation through familial coercion. It's difficult to prosecute because the victim, you, signed willingly, even if under false pretenses. So she gets away with it." "I didn't say that." He pulled out a folder. "I've been investigating your mother and Mr. Brooks for the past 3 days. The timing of their Florida property purchase, combined with your grandmother's death and these documents, creates what we call a pattern of intended deception. If I can prove they planned this in advance, it becomes conspiracy to commit fraud. Can you prove it?" "That depends. Do you have access to your mother's email or text messages?" I thought about her laptop, always left open on the kitchen table when I visited. Her phone, charging on the counter. Password a combination of my birthday and hers that she'd never bothered to change. "Maybe," I said carefully. Chen leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to break any laws, but if you happen to come across communications between your mother and Mr. Brooks discussing this plan, that would be helpful." The next Sunday, my mother invited me to dinner. "Mom, haven't seen you in weeks. I'm worried about you. Come over. I'm making your favorite lasagna." My favorite had been lasagna when I was 9. I hadn't eaten red meat in 6 years. But my mother wouldn't know that because she'd never bothered to ask. I responded, "Sure." 6 p.m.? I arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile practiced in the mirror. My mother answered the door in an apron, playing the role of doting parent with the skill of long practice. "Claire, I'm so glad you're here. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. The table was set with her good dishes. Everything was perfectly staged for a performance of normalcy. "Wine?" she asked, reaching for glasses. "I'll open it." I took the bottle, uncorking it slowly, while my mother busied herself with the salad. Her laptop sat on the counter, screen dark but accessible. We ate. We made small talk. She asked about work, not really listening to my answers. I asked about her plans, watching her eyes light up when she mentioned maybe traveling more now that things are settled. Actually, I said casually, pushing pasta around my plate, I've been thinking about Grandma's estate. Do you know when everything will be finalized? My mother's fork paused midair. Soon, honey. These things take time. But don't worry, I'm making sure everything goes where it's supposed to. Where it's supposed to go, I repeated. Right. After dinner, she excused herself to the bathroom. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, I was at the laptop. The screen lit up, still logged in. Her email sat open. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started photographing. Email after email between her and Thomas Brooks, dated from 6 months before my grandmother's death. Thomas. The old bat's will is airtight. Everything to Claire. Mom. Then we make Claire sign it over. She trusts me. She always does what I tell her. Thomas. What if she asks questions? Mom. She won't. I've been training her for 23 years. I photographed message after message, bile rising in my throat. Mom. Once we have Claire's signature, the Florida condo is ours. Maybe that place in Tuscany, too. Thomas. You're brilliant. Mom. No, I'm practical. I've earned this. 23 years of dealing with that self-righteous bitch and her self-righteous granddaughter. The bathroom door opened. I shoved my phone in my pocket and closed the laptop just as my mother returned. Everything okay? She asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Perfect, I said, smiling. Just checking my messages. Work stuff. I left 30 minutes later, hugging her goodbye with the evidence of her betrayal burning in my pocket. I sent the photos to Chen at 11 p.m. that night, hands still shaking with adrenaline and rage. He called me at 7 a.m. the next morning. Ms. Morrison, what you've provided is exactly what we needed. This is premeditated fraud, conspiracy, and exploitation. We're moving forward with criminal charges. How long will that take? Weeks for the formal indictment. But I can expedite a freeze on your grandmother's estate assets immediately. As of this afternoon, your mother won't be able to access or transfer any funds. The satisfaction was immediate and visceral. She'll know something's wrong. Yes, Chen agreed. She will. Are you prepared for that? I thought about 23 years of manipulation, of being told I was dramatic when I expressed emotions, of being guilted for wanting independence, of watching my mother perform martyrdom while bleeding my grandmother dry. I'm ready, I said. The asset freeze hit my mother's accounts at 2 p.m. I know because she called me at 2:47, her voice shrill with barely controlled panic. Claire, something's wrong with the estate accounts. Everything's been frozen. Did you do something? Did you say something to someone? I let the silence stretch, enjoying the sound of her composure cracking. Claire? Answer me. I signed some papers, I said, finally, keeping my voice eerily calm. Remember? You told me they were just administrative documents, standard estate stuff. You said to trust you. What did you do? Her voice dropped to something dangerous. What did you tell people? The truth, Mom. I told them the truth. About what you had me sign. About your plans with Thomas. About how you've been stealing from Grandma for years. The line went silent. Then, you ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you. Everything I sacrificed. You sacrificed nothing, I interrupted, and the words felt like breaking chains. Grandma paid your mortgage. Grandma paid for my college. Grandma took care of both of us, while you played victim and planned how to steal from me. That money was mine. I deserved it after dealing with that woman's judgment for years. It wasn't yours. It was mine. Grandma left it to me, and you knew that. She hung up, 3 minutes later, Thomas Brooks called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that started with threats and ended with desperate bargaining. I forwarded it to Chen. The formal indictment came 2 weeks later. The charges read like a greatest hits of financial crime: fraud, conspiracy, elder exploitation, forgery. She'd apparently forged my grandmother's signature on several documents, and theft by deception. Melissa filed the civil suit the same day, seeking return of all inheritance assets, plus damages for emotional distress and legal fees. My mother hired a lawyer, 3 actually, after the first 2 quit when they saw the evidence against her. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Those 42 days felt like walking through glass, every step painful, every breath deliberate. My mother tried everything. She showed up at my apartment building, security turning her away. She sent emails alternating between threats and tearful apologies. She had relatives I barely knew call to tell me I was destroying the family. What family? I asked my great-aunt Susan during one particularly aggressive call. The one where my mother pretended to be poor while stealing from her mother-in-law? Or the one where she trained me to be compliant so she could rob me blind? Susan had no answer. Thomas Brooks tried a different tactic. He reached out through a mutual acquaintance, offering to make things right if I dropped the charges. The offer? $500,000, hush money to let them keep the rest. I told Chen. He added attempted bribery to the charges. The day of the preliminary hearing, I wore my grandmother's pearls, the ones she'd given me for my college graduation. My mother had tried to get me to loan them back for the funeral. I'd refused, one of the few times I'd ever told her no. The courthouse was smaller than I expected, wood paneling and fluorescent lights, and the smell of old paper and stale coffee. My mother sat at the defendant's table with her third lawyer, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit who kept whispering urgently in her ear. She'd dressed carefully, conservative navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back. The performance of a woman wronged, not a woman guilty. When she saw me walk in with Melissa, her composure slipped for just a second. I saw real fear flash across her face before the mask came back. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Alvarez, presented the case with surgical precision. The emails, the forged signatures, the timeline of the Florida condo purchase. The asset transfers my mother had already begun before my grandmother's body was cold. The defendant engaged in a calculated, premeditated scheme to defraud her own daughter of a multi-million-dollar inheritance, Alvarez stated, her voice carrying across the quiet courtroom. She exploited the trust, built over a lifetime. She weaponized grief. And she did it all while pretending to be a loving mother, acting in her daughter's best interest. My mother's lawyer tried to argue that the documents I'd signed were valid, that there was no proof of coercion, that this was a family dispute blown out of proportion. Then Alvarez played the recording. I hadn't known Chen had gotten a warrant for Thomas Brooks' phone records, hadn't known they'd found voicemails. But there it was, my mother's voice filling the courtroom. Thomas, she signed everything. The idiot actually signed everything. I told you she'd do whatever I said. 23 years of training her to be obedient finally paid off. We're getting the house. All of it. Everything that sanctimonious bitch left behind. The date stamp, 2 days after the funeral, while she'd been texting me condolences and offers of comfort. I watched my mother's face crumble, watched the carefully constructed mask of victimhood shatter. She looked at me across the courtroom, and for the first time in my life, I saw her see me, really see me, not as an extension of herself or a tool to be used, but as a person she'd underestimated. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the evidence in silence. Then she spoke. "Ms. Morrison, the defendant, the evidence presented indicates a clear pattern of fraudulent behavior and exploitation. I'm approving the asset freeze to remain in place pending full trial. I'm also issuing a restraining order. You are not to contact your daughter directly or through intermediaries. Do you understand?" My mother stood on shaky legs. "Your Honor, she's my daughter. I have a right." "You have no rights here," the judge interrupted. "You surrendered those rights when you chose to commit fraud. Sit down." My mother sat. Outside the courthouse, Melissa squeezed my shoulder. "The criminal trial will take months, but the civil case moves faster. We can have the inheritance restored and in your control within 90 days. "What happens to her?" I asked. "Prison, most likely. With her age and the amount stolen, probably 5 to 7 years if she's convicted. And she will be convicted. The evidence is overwhelming." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. This woman had been my entire world. She'd shaped every belief I held about myself, every fear, every doubt. Learning she was a monster didn't erase the programming. It just made me question every moment of my life. "Claire," Melissa said gently, "what she did to you, that wasn't love. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't exploit. What your grandmother left you wasn't just money. It was freedom. The freedom to see clearly, to choose differently, to become who you actually are, not who your mother wanted you to be." That night, I went to my grandmother's house, the one my mother had tried to steal. The estate lawyers had given me the key pending resolution of the case. I walked through rooms where I'd spent Sunday dinners, where Grandma had slipped me 20s and told me stories about my father. Stories that contradicted everything my mother had said. In Grandma's desk, I found a letter, addressed to me, dated 1 week before she died. "Dearest Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and your mother has likely already tried to take what I'm leaving for you. I hope you remembered your promise. I hope you were brave enough to question her. I've left you everything not because you need money, but because I need to give you permission. Permission to see your mother clearly. Permission to walk away. Permission to build a life free from her manipulation. Your father didn't abandon you. Your mother drove him away when you were 2. Told him, if he tried to stay in your life, she'd make sure he never saw you again. He sent letters, birthday cards, child support. She kept them all. They're in a box in my attic. I've included the key. You were never the problem, sweetheart. You were never too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. You were always exactly enough. She couldn't see it because she couldn't see past her own needs. Live freely, love without fear. And remember, the best revenge against people who use you is becoming someone they can never use again. All my love, Grandma. I found the box in the attic. 21 years of letters from a father who hadn't abandoned me, who'd tried to fight for custody and lost, who'd finally given up trying to reach me through my mother, but never stopped writing. The last letter was dated 3 months ago. Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Your mother says you don't want contact, but I have to hope that's another of her lies. If you ever want to know the truth about why I'm not in your life, I'm here. I've always been here. Love, Dad. I called the number included in the letter. He answered on the second ring, and when I said, "Dad?" his voice broke. The criminal trial took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and court dates, and my mother's legal team trying every angle to avoid the inevitable. They tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone exaggerating a family dispute for financial gain. But the evidence was too strong. The emails, the recordings, the forged documents, the timeline of fraud. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. My mother stood as the verdict was read, her face slack with disbelief. She genuinely thought she would win, had genuinely believed that her performance of victimhood would override the facts. At sentencing, the judge gave her 7 years, not the maximum, but close. Ms. Morrison, you exploited your own daughter's grief and trust for financial gain, the judge said. You betrayed not only her, but the memory of a woman who supported you for years, despite your behavior. This sentence reflects the severity of your actions and the calculated nature of your deception. My mother's last words before they led her away. This is your fault, Claire. All of it. Even then, she couldn't accept responsibility, couldn't see what she'd done, could only see herself as a victim of my ingratitude. I didn't attend any appeals or parole hearings. I didn't need to. She was no longer my problem. The civil case resolved faster. The court ordered full return of all inheritance assets, plus damages for emotional distress, an additional $1.2 million. My mother's Florida condo was seized and sold. Her house, the one my grandmother had paid for, was sold. Every asset she'd accumulated was liquidated to pay what she owed. Thomas Brooks, facing his own charges for conspiracy, cooperated fully. He turned over bank records showing my mother had been planning this for over a year, had researched elder law and inheritance statutes, had consulted with 3 different lawyers about how to legally steal from her own daughter. The calculation was breathtaking, and it had almost worked. By the time everything was settled, I'd inherited $6.2 million. The house in Connecticut, my grandmother's jewelry and personal effects, and something more valuable than any of it: clarity. I met my father for coffee on a sunny afternoon in Boston. He was 53, with gray at his temples, and my eyes. We sat across from each other in a cafe, 2 strangers connected by blood and stolen years. I tried, he said, his voice rough. God, Claire, I tried so hard to be in your life. But your mother, she was determined. And the courts, back then, mothers almost always got custody. By the time you were old enough to decide for yourself, she'd convinced you I didn't want you. I know, I said. I've read the letters. All of them. We cried. We talked. We started building something new, not trying to recover what was lost, but creating something different. Better. I sold the Connecticut house. Too many memories, both good and bad. Donated half my inheritance to organizations supporting children of parental alienation. Established a legal fund in my grandmother's name for people fighting inheritance fraud. The rest, I invested carefully. Quit my graphic design job and went back to school for psychology, specializing in family systems and manipulation. If I could help even one person recognize the patterns I'd missed for so long, it would mean something. A year after my mother's sentencing, I received a letter from her prison. I almost threw it away unopened. Instead, I read it alone in my new apartment overlooking Boston Harbor. Claire, I've had a lot of time to think. My therapist here says I should take responsibility, that I should acknowledge what I did. But I want you to understand something. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I deserved that money. I spent years dealing with your grandmother's judgment, her superiority, her constant implications that I wasn't good. Enough. That money was compensation. You'll never understand what it's like to be second place your whole life, to watch resources pour into someone else while you scrape by. That's what your grandmother did to me. And yes, I took it out on you. But you were never supposed to find out. I'm sorry you found out. I'm sorry this had to get so ugly. But I'm not sorry I tried. Your mother, I read it 3 times, looking for remorse, for actual acknowledgement of harm, for any sign of the mother I'd hoped existed somewhere beneath the monster. It wasn't there, even in prison, even after losing everything. She couldn't see me as a person, only as an inconvenience, a complication in her plan. I wrote 1 sentence on a piece of paper and mailed it back. You were right about one thing. I'll never understand being like you. Thank you for that. 2 years later, I stood in a courtroom for a different reason. This time as an expert, witness in an inheritance fraud case. A young man, 25, whose stepfather had manipulated him into signing away his deceased mother's estate. I testified about patterns of coercion, about how family members use guilt, obligation, and manufactured crises to exploit trust, about how documents can be presented in ways that obscure their true purpose. Afterward, the young man approached me, tears streaming down his face. "You saved me," he said. "If I hadn't heard about your case, I would have just accepted what happened. I would have thought it was my fault." "It's not your fault," I told him. "What they do, the manipulation, the exploitation, that's on them. Your only job is to recognize it and walk away." "How do you walk away from family?" "You don't walk away from family," I said. "You walk away from people who use family as a weapon. Real family doesn't require you to diminish yourself. Real family doesn't exploit your trust. Real family loves you without conditions or manipulation." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Thank you." I drove home that evening through city streets glowing with twilight. My phone rang, my father, checking in like he did every few days. We talked about nothing important. Baseball, weather. Whether I'd tried that new restaurant he'd mentioned. Normal, boring, beautiful. This is what I learned. Some people will spend your whole life convincing you their betrayal is your fault, that questioning them is disloyalty, that protecting yourself is selfishness. They're wrong. My mother sits in prison, probably still believing she was the victim, still certain that if she'd been just a little more careful, if I'd been just a little more obedient, her plan would have worked. She's right about that last part. If I'd been just a little more obedient, I'd have lost everything. But I remembered my promise. I questioned the documents. I found allies. And I learned that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is becoming someone they can never control again. My grandmother left me $6 million. But the real inheritance was permission. Permission to see clearly, to walk away, to choose myself. And that's worth more than any amount of money. 5 years after my mother's conviction, I received an email from the parole board. She was eligible for early release after serving 4 years. Did I want to make a statement at her hearing? I didn't. I'd said everything I needed to say. She was no longer my story. She was released 6 months later. I heard through distant relatives that she moved to Arizona, tried to reconnect with Thomas Brooks. He'd moved on, married someone else. She was alone, broke, and permanently labeled a felon. I felt nothing when I heard. Not satisfaction. Not sympathy. Just nothing. That absence of feeling was its own kind of freedom. Last month, I published a book about financial exploitation within families. It's dedicated to my grandmother and filled with practical advice on recognizing manipulation, documenting abuse, and legal recourse for victims. It's been on the bestseller list for 3 weeks. My father sent flowers when it hit #1. The card read, "Your grandmother would be so proud. I am too." I keep it on my desk next to the photo of Grandma from her 80th birthday, smiling at the camera with that knowing look she always had. Like she could see into the future and knew everything would work out eventually. She was right. The money is still there, carefully invested and growing. But I live simply. Work matters more than wealth. Helping people recognize what I missed for so long matters more than anything. Sometimes people ask if I'll ever forgive my mother. The question assumes forgiveness is something she's owed, that letting go of anger requires reconciliation. But I've learned something important. You can release anger without forgiving. You can move forward without forgetting. You can heal without reconciling with the person who broke you. My mother taught me manipulation. My grandmother taught me truth. And life taught me that the greatest power comes from knowing the difference. So, no, I won't forgive her. I don't need to. I'm too busy being free. If you were Claire, would you have been able to see the truth before signing those papers? Or would you have trusted your mother until it was almost too late? Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones who damage us deepest. But recognizing that truth, that's the moment when everything changes.